Alright, guys, it's Chris back again to talk more about what could have been in wrestling. This week, taking you back to the very beginning of 1999 and talking about WCW. Yes, anyone who was watching wrestling during that time and was a WCW fan, obviously was tuned into the Monday Night Wars or has gone back to watch that and relive some history. You know this scene. Hulk Hogan takes on Kevin Nash on January 4th, 1999 for the world title on what should have been a match between, or what was billed in Georgia as a match between Kevin Nash and Bill Goldberg in their rematch from Starrcade. And yes, everyone knows it, like I said. They fake having a match. Hulk Hogan, or Hollywood Hogan at that time, excuse me, he pokes Kevin Nash in the chest. Kevin Nash takes this big flat back bump, lays down on his back, and gets pinned. They get up and celebrate, and that was the first sign, or the first iceberg, that WCW hit, because as much as people like Kevin Nash and others like to pretend that that had nothing to do with WCW going under and their lack of popularity and their lack of ratings, as ratings went down through 99, that was the first huge mistake they made. They'd made some small mistakes, actually some other mistakes in 97 going into 98 when they were still hot, but this was really the first real death nail to WCW. And look, I'm not saying WCW would have survived, obviously, the bad booking by Vince Russo, the standards and practices that were laid down by TBS and obviously the AOL Time Warner merger. But this really was something I don't think they ever truly recovered from, because a lot of people just lost a lot of faith in WCW that night, and they really, I think, a lot of people lost confidence in Eric Bischoff as a leader for that company internally from what you see, honestly, with guys leaving, guys wanting to jump ship to WWF, and then ultimately Eric Bischoff being sent home that September. So what I want to talk about is really, what if WCW had actually done the right thing, in my opinion, and gone with the most over wrestler they had, Goldberg, and had him regain the World Heavyweight title versus Kevin Nash that night. Excuse me. And look, I'll be honest, I was one of those guys who was not a big Goldberg fan during his run. I thought that, just a bald guy they're pushing, trying to get like a Stone Cold Steve Austin, badass guy that no one wanted to mess with over. But when I rewatched a lot of the stuff over the years, I gained a new appreciation for just how huge he was and how over he truly was. He was the hottest thing in WCW through 98, and outside of maybe like moments where Sting joined the Wolfpack, the Red and Black, and brief moments like that, I don't think anything came close. Him winning the U.S. title from Raven got a huge reaction the night after Spring Stampede in 98. Then, of course, a lot of people remember the famous match in the Georgia Dome again. So in 98, in July of 98, where WCW for free gave away Goldberg versus Hogan for the world title, and it ends with Goldberg holding up the two titles as he's a double champion and becomes the first, as Bobby Heenan said, the first undefeated world champion. So, obviously, he was still a mega star at this point, Bill Goldberg. And I just want to talk about, what if WCW, like I said, had put the title back on him, and how it would have booked, how it should have been booked going forward. And I'm just going to take us through most of 1999, but I'm pretty much going to stop at the beginning of the Vince Russo era in the fall of 1999, because his booking, as people will know, is ADD wrestling. He believes in short title reigns. I know he believed in building the company around Goldberg, but just the things he put him in week to week, I don't know. I was not a fan of how he was used, because of the fact that Vince Russo might know how to tell some stories to backstage and segments for wrestlers, but he doesn't know how to actually book a wrestling show. That is honestly what I think about him. So enough about that. Let's go back to January 4th. Mick Foley, in a old WWE DVD, said he was watching that Nitro that night. So even though he had just won the WWF title, as he did in a pre-taped Raw that also aired on January 4th, 1999, he said he was watching Nitro and he did not like how they were using Bill Goldberg. He said they were making him look very silly because to get him out of the match so that they could have the match between Hogan and Nash, they had this whole storyline where Miss Elizabeth of the NWO, claimed Goldberg was stalking her at the gym. Every arena they go to, he's there stalking her, and he gets taken downtown for questioning. And Goldberg's getting cuffed, and he's trying to state his case and saying, "You all know I only do good for this community." And looking back, yeah, it was a dumb way to utilize him, and it would have been much better served if they did a similar build like they did in the summer, where they show him warming up in the back after every match and just give some quick camera cuts to him, obviously maybe lifting weights or just stretching and psyching himself up for the rematch, trying to kind of give you a side-by-side and give you a nice throwback to the huge moment when he beat Hogan. So obviously I would not have done that where they take him out and they have him get arrested for stalking Elizabeth and basically keep him there so that finger poke of doom match happens. What I would have done instead is, if you still wanted to have Hogan there, I know he was doing his fake presidential run at that point, ironically claiming he was going to be the next president of the United States. If anyone saw him today, it's kind of ironic that I'm talking about this. But what you could have done is have Hulk Hogan come back, or Hollywood Hogan come back as a heel still, and say what he said: "I owe my fans one more match." And he could say, regardless of who wins this match for the World Heavyweight title, I'm laying claim as the next challenger, and I want a shot at my World Heavyweight title. So instead of obviously having him wrestle Kevin Nash, and if you go back and watch Nitro, this is just a random side comment, but when he wanted to insult Nash, he called Kevin Nash a spoon. He actually said, "I'm going to take down that spoon, Kevin Nash." I don't know why, that always kind of made me laugh. But instead of that, obviously, have Goldberg and Nash have their rematch. And what you could do, because Eric Bischoff had the NWO reunite that night. There's the picture, a lot of people know the scene where they spray paint the world title red and black, not black. They use red spray paint, put NWO on it. And Kevin Nash was like, "Can you say deja vu?" Because they basically were trying to go back to what got them hot 3 years previous, not realizing that people were tired of that storyline by then. So, in the match, if you really want to make it where you reunite the NWO, what you could do is obviously have Nash and Goldberg having their match. Goldberg is about to set up for the spear and then jackknife Kevin Nash. And the way he lost is Scott Hall was disguised as a security guard, and he tasered Bill Goldberg, and then Nash, of course, powerbombed him and beat him. What they could do instead is you could have Goldberg hit the spear on Kevin Nash. Out comes Scott Hall again, but this time Goldberg intercepts Hall when he tries to tase him, takes it from him, tases Scott Hall, so that takes Hall down, and then he hits the sphere on Nash, and then jackknifes him, and then you still have, obviously, your title change where Goldberg takes back the World Heavyweight title, and you would have had a monster reaction. Rather than the confused reaction you got where no one knew what was going on, because with the finger poke of doom when Nash took that huge bump, people stood up just kind of in confusion saying, "What is going on here?" Not realizing that basically they basically gave a fake match away, hyped up a match that didn't happen, and handed Hogan back the belt. What you can do is then have Hogan and Steiner. I know he was the acting leader of the NWO at that time because Hogan had faked that retirement. You can have Hogan and Scott Steiner come out, and then when Nash gets up after getting pinned, and Goldberg has the belt, you can have Nash get up like he's going to get pinned, act like he's going to shake Goldberg's hand, but then out come Hogan and Nash. I'm sorry, Hogan and Steiner. And then Hall can get up from being tased, make his recovery. And you can basically have it where it looks like Hall, Hogan, and Steiner are about to attack Goldberg. And for a second, Nash is looking like he's going to have Goldberg's back and they're going to fend off these three guys. But then you can swerve them because they were so determined to restart the NWO angle. Nash then turns quickly, boots Bill Goldberg, and then all four guys jump on him. You can still have Lex Luger turn heel like they did, have Lex come out, make the fake save, and then he attacks Goldberg, so you can still do the beatdown that they did. And obviously, you would have generated heat. People wouldn't have been happy to see Nitro end with Goldberg getting beaten down. But one, he'd be the world champion again. You would have gotten the big reaction. And two, three, and third, even though you're ending with a beatdown angle similar to what they did in reality, you've established all the future challengers for Goldberg's title with this beatdown. He can go through Lex, he can go through Scott Hall, he can go through Big Papa Pump, etc. So at least you're setting up this beatdown for a future angle where your top guy, your most over babyface, as the world champion, has foes to go against. Now, I want to address something else about this, because I did say you're ending it with heat, but I feel you're ending it with heat that people want to see a follow-up with, because people want to see how Goldberg responds to this, now that he realizes, yes, he's world champion again, but he has the newly reunited NWO gunning for his title. So, the difference between that is an ending heat segment that people want to come back and see. The finger poke of doom, people don't want to admit it, it was the wrong kind of heat. People talk about this a lot. There's heat where people want to see a follow-up because you want to see the babyface get revenge. And then there is that change the channel heat. And I have friends who told me when they saw the finger poke of doom and they saw how dumb it was, their initial reaction is, why am I going to watch WCW? This is so stupid. And clearly Kevin Nash didn't care about the world title belt. He just hands it back to Hogan. But if your top guys don't care, then why should the fans care? Kevin Nash also had an interview in 2007 where he said, yeah, the finger poke of doom worked because it pissed a lot of people off. For a guy who claims to know so much about wrestling, he doesn't realize that, yeah, it pissed people off to the point that they didn't want to keep watching, and you lost all these people who were watching week to week because of that stupid idea. So again, enough about that. I just wanted to talk about that really quickly. But let's go back to Goldberg. The weeks after, obviously, because they went to WCW Sold Out in 1999, and I know that Hall faced Goldberg in a ladder match with the taser. You grabbed the taser, and the first one to tase their opponent won the match. It was actually an interesting ending because Goldberg actually had the taser, and he threw it to Hall for Hall to use, but he threw it high. Hall jumped up to grab it like this, and while he jumped up, Goldberg speared him while in air while he had his hands up to catch the taser. It was a creative ending, but what you could do instead, because week to week they were just using Goldberg, obviously they wanted to get him established still as a top guy and a top challenger. Well, now he still is established. He doesn't need to be reestablished as a top guy because he's the world champion. What you can do is still have him run through some of the lower members of the NWO. I know around that time he faced Scott Norton in a main event match, who I know was part of the what they eventually called the B team of the NWO. But Scott Norton still had credibility. He was a power lifter. I think he was actually a champion in New Japan, because I know WCW had a working relationship with Japan for a while. And he was still looked at as a credible heel because of the way they put him over on commentary as former national arm wrestling champion, one of the strongest guys in the company. And when the Giant was with WCW, he had a couple matches with the Giant where he actually, obviously, he didn't win, but he was picking him up and like back suplexing him. And this is before Brock Lesnar was back suplexing the Big Show. So they at least put him over as a credible challenger. You can have him go through guys like that, and also maybe even, honestly, as dumb as it sounds, maybe in a handicap match, beat Bryan Adams and Horace Hogan. So you can say he beat Hogan's nephew and Hogan, so he's now beaten both Hogans. And you can still do the ladder match between him and Hall at Sold Out, but this time for the world title. I think Scott Hall should be the first challenger for Goldberg as the world champion, because Scott Hall at that Starrcade is the reason he lost his undefeated streak. So you can actually do that. You can build off that and give Scott Hall a world title shot. Goldberg obviously wins it. He's not going to win it the same way. But what he can do, obviously, is he can hit this. He can actually, what I think they can do, since it would have been a ladder match, I think Hall would have been able to put a solid match together with his experience with ladder matches. And you could do something creative, maybe where Goldberg does jump off the top rope and spear Hall off the ladder, similar to like Edge with Jeff Hardy at WrestleMania 2000, so you can do it a year early. After he does like a mega spear where he spears Hall off the ladder, he can maybe jackhammer him onto the ladder. Hall is down and out, and then Goldberg grabs the title and retains his world title. The next guy I think that they can pair him with, in all honesty, and this was a match that did take place in February of 1999. Of course, WCW didn't really build up a ton to it. It was on a Nitro, but it still got a mega reaction. You could have him start a feud with Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. The reason why I like the idea of Steiner is because, one, they actually had, when they finally did get a pay-per-view build-up the next year in 2000 at Fall Brawl, they just had a match that basically came across as a pure fight, and the match was only like 12 to 15-ish minutes, but honestly, that's one of my favorite WCW matches. It was just two guys literally just stiffing each other and trying to basically make it, and it really looked like they were really just trying to just outdo each other and hit each other as hard as they could and hit power moves on each other. So if you like that kind of power match, then you would definitely enjoy that. You can build up to that, but I actually don't think you should have it on Nitro. I think matches like this, Scott Steiner versus Bill Goldberg, should be saved for the next pay-per-view. The next pay-per-view, when they did it, because Hogan was champion, they did Hogan versus Flair, where David Flair turned on his dad and joined the NWO, because who didn't join the NWO eventually? And of course, obviously, they then went on to have their cage match the next year, the next month in March. I don't care for that. I know actually that the February pay-per-view, I think it was Super Brawl, it got actually a big number. Like, it drew a big buy rate, but that was their last good buy rate ever. Everything else went downhill after that. And it's because, again, they stuck with the same guys for too long on top. The same main events. That main event of Hogan versus Flair in 1999 was also a main event of Bash at the Beach in 1995. So 4 years later, we're still watching the same guys. So instead, I think you can actually, again, build up Scott Steiner. He was looked at as a credible guy as well. He was being pushed as a top guy. And obviously Goldberg is Goldberg. And go back and watch the reactions he was still getting, even after losing the belt in 99. Go back and watch the reactions he was getting on those Nitros. The crowd was going insane. And another point to that is the commentators would have so much energy and would get so pumped up and so loud when Goldberg was wrestling, really putting him over as a big deal, but also knowing that he was probably one of the last few stars they had left. People talk about in '99, even the commentators gave up, and you can tell Tony Schiavone didn't want to be there, neither did Bobby Heenan. But in those like 5 to 7 minute Goldberg segments, it was like they had new life again. And they would get so excited and they would totally get back into the zone and focus on commentary and making sure Goldberg was presented as the biggest star possible. What you can do is still have, obviously, Goldberg feuding with the NWO, considering that could still be the focus. And you can still have him, Scott Steiner was the television champion at that point. I think you could still have him stay television champion. You can have him pick up victories on Nitro over Diamond Dallas Page and Booker T, who were 2 higher level stars, and even maybe be a member of the Four Horsemen, because Flair was still being presented as a main guy. I know Flair was still over as well, but it was just time to have newer people on top. The Four Horsemen had reunited, so maybe you could have him go against guys like Malenko or Benoit or even Flair and pick up victories, all leading up to a champion versus champion match the next month. So instead at Super Brawl, the main event is Goldberg versus Steiner. Goldberg again should, in a hard-fought match, should retain the world title. Obviously, he would have to deal with the NWO interference. But in this case, I actually think the Horsemen should have Goldberg's back and take out and neutralize the NWO. Steiner can get distracted by the brawling outside. He turns around into a sphere. Again, jackhammer, victory for Goldberg. And then, of course, you can then branch off and have Steiner then feud, because I know his brother Rick had been injured for a bit with a shoulder injury. He comes back that February, so you can actually have Steiner either get distracted by the brawling or have his brother make his return at that pay-per-view, distract him, and that's why he loses. So then Scott could branch off to a feud with Rick Steiner and do the brother versus brother feud they were doing. And then that leaves Goldberg free to go through his next member of the NWO. The next member of the NWO, to me, for him to go through, would have been Luger, but I know Luger actually was out of action for a while. Luger, if I remember right, he had like a broken arm, actually. When I went back and watched one of those Nitros, he came out in a cast. So I think actually he had a legitimate injury at this point. So if they wanted to play off that, you could have Goldberg attack Luger on a Nitro, or they could do one of those backstage segments where, to protect the guy is already laid out and someone else is standing over him, so you don't see the attack, but it's implied that, oh, he's been jumped from behind and he's taken out and he's out cold. So to protect Luger, if he already had the injury, you can just do that. You can have a jump cut during a match to the locker room area. Lex Luger is laid out. Goldberg is standing over him, holds the world title over him, and says, if you want this, come get it. But then the NWO comes in, they see Luger's laid out, and they take him, and they realize, oh, wow, Goldberg broke his arm. That's obviously an angle that was actually done with Luger 2 years previous, where the Outsiders took him out, laid over him, and then Luger had to wrestle with a fake broken arm, so they could just basically recreate that angle, that backstage segment. So for that, you have Goldberg now, instead, because I think his next guy would have been Luger to go through, now you have him rematch with Kevin Nash. Goldberg did have a rematch in reality with Kevin Nash at that Spring Stampede, I believe, and he beat him. Goldberg got his win back, which was the right thing to do, but he still should have been World Heavyweight Champion. Again, people wanted to see Goldberg as champion. And the crazy thing is, besides a one-day reign that was reversed the next day during the Vince Russo run, Goldberg never got the world title back. That would literally be the equivalent, I'm not exaggerating this in terms of how over he was, is if Austin had lost the title in '98 at King of the Ring like he did to Kane and never got another run with it during the Attitude Era. Because I asked other people, I said, is it kind of surprising that Goldberg never got another reign with the belt after Starrcade in '98? And everyone said, it's more than kind of surprising. It's incredibly surprising and makes no sense. He should have been champion in '99. So Goldberg obviously comes out and goes through Kevin Nash at String Stampede. And of course, leading up to it, you can have it where Nash actually, what happens is Nash can obviously lay claim, I'm the one to beat Goldberg, I'm going to bring back the title to the NWO, and I'm going to be World Heavyweight Champion again. The reason why I think he should cut this promo is because even though they reunited, if you go back and watch it, they reunited the NWO that January. I don't know what they were thinking, but literally just 2 months later, they do an angle where there's internal problems within the NWO, because there was the NWO Elite, the A team wearing the red and black, and the B team wearing the black and white. And then, of course, there was all this infighting where guys like Stevie Ray and Kurt Hennig, who eventually gets kicked out, and others like, I know, like Brian Adams, who were all unhappy with the Elite, with the Kevin Nashes and Scott Halls and Hogans. And they did this internal fighting angle where no one was getting along, which is what they had done the year previous when they had split off the NWO in the first place to the black and white and red and black. So they were just rehatching another angle that people didn't care about. But if they decided to do that again, because Bischoff just thought if we just recreate angles that were popular, people will want to see it, you can have Nash talking about how he handed Goldberg his only loss, and that he was going to bring the title back to the Wolfpack and back to the NWO Elite. And Hogan can then make a comment saying, well, we all know that still should be my belt. So you can obviously hint tension between those two, because for some reason they thought that people wanted to see more infighting in the NWO. So again, what you can actually have now to further the dissension is Hogan accidentally cost Nash the match against Goldberg. To protect Nash, you can have, obviously, Goldberg is being held. He's about to get hit with the chair. He moves. Nash gets hit with the chair. Goldberg takes out Hogan. And then he spheres. And he spheres Kevin Nash and then jackhammers him onto a chair to win the match. From here, I would actually shift gears a little bit. Because now he's running through the NWO, and the next pay-per-view after that would have been Slamboree. And at Slamboree, that was considered, I think, one of their quote B show pay-per-views. And honestly, I don't think they would have had Hogan face Goldberg at a show like that. What you can do is then shift, because Ric Flair being one of the top baby faces around this time, also they decided he wanted to make a heel turn randomly. He turned heel, and I know he had a face-to-face with Goldberg where Goldberg and him got into an argument. Granted, Flair was actually helping out his son, who was being, I think, choked by Goldberg at the time in the ring after David Flair had put his hand in had basically started poking Goldberg in the chest, literally poking the bear. Goldberg gets fired up, acts like he's about to spear him and jackhammer him. Flair comes out as the acting president of the company because he had won the president role from Bischoff in that angle at the end of 1998. But he comes out, attacks Goldberg, cuts a heel promo on him, and basically turns heel at that point, and Goldberg then press slammed him. So you can actually have a heel Ric Flair, because they thought that was a good move, where I know that Flair did that whole angle where he was, quote, going crazy and went to the mental asylum. Oh yeah, that was a real tasteful angle they did there. You can have Flair basically jump the line and go through his spiel that he kept doing, the I'm the president, I'm the boss, and your next challenger is going to be the Nature Boy Ric Flair. and then woo! So that can actually be the next challenger for Goldberg. So now it breaks him off the NWO, and it actually gives you a match WCW fans hadn't seen before. They hadn't seen Goldberg go through face off against Ric Flair. They also had the Four Horsemen, who had just reunited like 6 or 7 months previous, also start disbanding because Malenko and Benoit didn't turn heel with Flair, and I know Steve Mongo McMichael left the company that February, so they were disbanding. But what you can do is basically Flair, every time he has to face Goldberg, he hides behind Benoit and Malenko, and they are basically always fed to Goldberg. And obviously, he could have had good matches with both. Both were outstanding workers and great wrestlers. Obviously, you could put on a good match and being a smaller guy, could bump around for Goldberg, make his moves look even more impactful. And they would take the pins. They would be beaten with the spears and jackhammers. But Flair would remain untouched, and that could be how you break off and disband the Horsemen. Flair can still have the backup he had, because him turning heel at the same time Diamond Dallas Page turned heel, and he aligned himself with Bam Bam Bigelow and eventually Chris Kanyon, because they formed the Jersey Triad, and that actually became Flair's backup after that, and they won the tag titles. So you can still have the Triad win the tag titles as a trio, but I know they invoked the Freebird rule for them. So basically what that means, if you don't know, is 3 guys held 2 titles, but every match, they could just rotate one guy in and out of the match, so they could basically, every match was 3-on-2. So you can still have Flair have his backup. What they can do is actually attack Goldberg before the match, make it truly feel like Flair is about to win the world title, so he can say, the Triad's got the tag belts, I'm going to become, I think at that time, like a 14-time world champion. Goldberg can then fight out of this. He can fight out of it, and in reality, because there was a segment on Nitro when Diamond Dallas Page actually became the champion, they actually did it where Diamond Dallas Page became the champion, but he faced Goldberg in a rematch on Nitro, and Page, I believe, lost by disqualification for hitting Goldberg with a chair. And they did this whole thing where Page wanted to break Goldberg's, leg. That's right, he wanted to break Goldberg's leg. Of all people that came out to save him was Kevin Nash, who then made a babyface turn. So they can still do that here, even though it makes no sense. It made no sense. But if you wanted to, obviously, since top babyfaces like Flair and Diamond Dallas Page, actually maybe it did make a little bit of sense, 2 top babyfaces turned heel around that time, you need to have someone else turned babyface who was a heel to even out the numbers a little bit. So yeah, Nash can actually come out and help Goldberg beat Flair under the caveat of, yeah, I want you to keep that title because I want to be the one to take it from you again. So we can do it under that caveat. During this time as well, Hogan actually had a legitimate knee injury and had to have his knee scoped. So he was actually taken off TV, I should say. And I still actually think you can still have Diamond Dallas Page, like I said, as the Jersey Triad. I know that it would take away his title reign, but honestly, I just feel, even though he was over, they decided to turn him, Diamond Dallas Page, heel after he won the world title. So you cost yourself a top babyface there. What I would do instead is, obviously, still, if you still want to turn Page heel, have him jump right into the Triad angle, become a tag champion. He's still being presented as a top guy, as a champion. And then he can reignite his feud with Goldberg, this time with backup with the Triad of Kanyon and Bigelow in his corner. So he's going to try to bring the world title into the Triad. With that in mind, he can actually have his match with Goldberg, and I know that Goldberg actually would have to lose the belt at this point, because he actually went off to film Universal Soldier with Jean-Claude Van Damme that summer. So going, honestly, probably the next night on Nitro what you can do is have Diamond Dallas Page lay out the challenge for Goldberg. And what he can do, obviously, he can run through the Triad the night before, or the match before. So, night after Slamboree, he beats Canyon and Bigelow in a handicap match. Afterwards, he gets attacked by the Triad 3-on-1. But then making the save would be a returning Sting. Sting is a babyface, so you have another top babyface back to feud with the Flairs, the Diamond Dallas Pages, etc. And what you can do is obviously Randy Savage came back as well at this point. First as a babyface, then he made a pretty quick heel turn. But you can still have him come out and say, next week, it's going to be Sting versus Diamond Dallas Page versus Goldberg for the World Heavyweight title, and Macho Man can say, I will referee it. And like he did actually in a 4-way match when Page did win the title. So what I would have happen there is actually, I would have Sting pin Diamond Dallas Page with a Scorpion Death Drop while Goldberg is distracted by Flair and the Triad. So Goldberg's not eating the pin, but he loses his world title in this triple threat match, even though he's not pinned. This keeps Goldberg hot, keeps him safe, obviously, because he's protected, because he's not pinned, but gets the belt off him so we can go film Universal Soldier. Afterwards, again, you can have the beatdown, where the Triad and Flair beat down Sting, because Sting and obviously Flair can resume their rivalry, because they feuded forever, all through WCW. And then you can have the Triad finally take out Goldberg with a knee, and basically take him out with a chair, and obviously do the injured leg angle so he can go film Universal Soldier. I know around this time he was also feuding with Bret Hart, because I think the real way they took him out was Bret Hart came in at Slamboree when Goldberg was actually facing Sting in a one-on-one match. And he nails Goldberg with a chair over the head and then goes after his leg because they needed to write him off TV. And, of course, they did that awesome angle in Canada in WCW where Bret Hart challenged Goldberg to a match. Goldberg came out and speared Bret Hart, but the spear actually knocked out Goldberg. Bret Hart gets up after a minute or two, being groggy himself. He takes off his jersey, his Maple Leafs jersey, I think it was, to reveal he was wearing a steel plate on his chest, and Goldberg had just ran headfirst into a steel plate. And then Bret Hart covered Goldberg and did his own 3 count to have a, quote, victory over Goldberg. I think they still would have wanted to run with Bret and Goldberg at some point, but unfortunately, the very tragic passing of Owen, the tragedy in Kansas City did happen, so Bret was off TV for quite a while. And this also coincided with Bill being off TV. What you can do, obviously, Goldberg came back late that summer, and he started coming out to Megadeth for a while, and just said he was back. Around that time, Sid Vicious, or Psycho Sid, whatever you want to call him, was back in WCW. I still think you can still go ahead with that feud, that fall of 1999. So now we're getting close to the Russo time. And you can still have Sid and Goldberg feud. And Sid was doing his own undefeated streak gimmick at the time where he would come out middle of a random match, powerbomb both guys, have his own fake referee count of 3, and he would call those victories and say each week he would add like 4 or 5 more wins to his total and say he was going to surpass Goldberg. You can still do that feud where both men are undefeated because, again, Goldberg hasn't lost since that Starrcade. And when he lost the world title, he wasn't pinned. And you can still build up Sid while Goldberg's out that summer because Sid came back that June. And you can obviously lead up to their match. And I know they didn't face at Fall Brawl because Goldberg faced Diamond Dallas Page in a pretty crappy match at Fall Brawl 1999. I still think you can go ahead with that match. What you can actually do to establish Goldberg as immediately a title contender I think you could do a gauntlet match where he literally can run through the entire Triad to get his revenge and clean up and basically conclude that angle. So all three members, one by one, will get pinned by Goldberg. And that's 3 straight victories for Goldberg against 3 higher level guys, especially DDP being a top level main event talent in the people's eyes. And then he can transition to his feud with Sid. You can still build up the match to Halloween Havoc, and that October is when Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara came in. And that's why I wanted to wrap it up here, because again, Vince Russo is not a good long-term booker. He's a week-to-week booker. And a lot of people who have worked under him said that he would have ideas for an angle, and the very next week it would be dropped. He wouldn't see a lot of things through, and that's one of his biggest weaknesses. But to see this through, at least, you can still hype up Sid versus Goldberg at Halloween Havoc in October of '99. Sid was the U.S. champion because he had beaten Benoit at that Fall Brawl that September for the U.S. title. I still think you can have Sid be the U.S. champion and have Goldberg win the match like he did. He did win the match at a Halloween Havoc due to a ref stoppage because Sid was losing too much blood. Sid actually was beat up pretty badly before the match. He wrestles the match all bloodied. And actually, I think you can still end it the same way, because if you want to protect Sid and not have him get pinned, you can have the ref stoppage. Later that night, Sting as a heel was world champion, and he had turned heel that previous month when he used the bat to beat Hogan for the world title. In this situation, because Sting was the one who won that triple threat match, in my situation, in this rebooking situation, you can still have him turn heel as the world champion mid-reign, just like how CM Punk did during his WWE title reign in 2012. You can have Sting, because he was supposed to face Hogan, but then the whole angle was Hogan just comes out and walks out, and Sting is left with no one to face. Sting can still have the open challenge, answered by Goldberg. And Goldberg can beat Sting to win the World Heavyweight title. I remember even as a kid liking that finish because it was very reminiscent to the 1998 World title win, where Goldberg is U.S. champion, and then he has the second belt, the world title. And I honestly thought they were going to run with Goldberg long-term as champion again. In my opinion, again, they should have. So you can still have Halloween Havoc close out on a good note, on a high note, with Goldberg, again, similar to 1998, about a year and a half later, holding again both belts, the world title and the U.S. title, as a double champion, and again, ready to represent WCW as their top babyface and as world heavyweight champion. So that's how I'm going to leave it. That's how I would have gone around and not done the finger poke of doom. Also, I would, if I looking back, hindsight, I would not have Tony Schiavone announce to the world that Mick Foley, who wrestled in WCW as Cactus Jack, was going to win the WWF title that night on January 4th and lose about 400,000 viewers as soon as he said that. But I think that way, obviously, like I said, you can erase one of the, in my opinion, dumbest booking decisions in wrestling history. You can keep the guy who was keeping your company hot. You can keep him as the top guy and keep him hot and keep him as the most over babyface rather than having him get buried and spray painted by the NWO, like making him look like he was just another wrestler and not anyone important. And obviously, like I said, you can still have him have a good reign through the spring, get the title off him to film Universal Soldier, but then get the title back on him like they did at Halloween Havoc in 1999, October of 99 that year. So, guys, let me know what you think of that. If you're a Goldberg fan, let me know if you think that's a better way to handle his booking. Also, let me know again what you guys want to talk about. I really like talking about these kind of situations, and I've gotten some good ideas from people. Gotten some great feedback in terms of what they want me to talk about. Even rebooking a full show. If you feel that the wrong person went over at a main event at a WrestleMania, or even just a world title match in WrestleMania, If you'd like me to just rebook that ending for that one individual match and then have them and then talk about what they could have done the next year had they won the belt instead of lost, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this. And like I said, let me know what you think I should talk about. Let me know if you would do things differently with Goldberg and how you think you could have made WCW a better product than what they had given us. And honestly, like I said, appreciate all the feedback, guys, and take care.